Today, my name is Jaroslaw Martyniuk. I'm a friend of Muchi Cepa, and Muchi asked me to say a few words about the current situation in Ukraine, and I agreed to do this in a very general way. This is not a prepared talk. This is going to be more of a stream of consciousness, whatever is at the top of my head. But it will include the overview of the current situation as well as the historical background leading up to this situation. So first, let me tell you what the good news are in Ukraine. As everybody knows, on May 25th, the Ukrainian elections were held, and Poroshenko got a big majority. So what the significance of this election is that it puts, it makes Putin's contention that Ukrainians are fascists, it calls this a lie very clearly. And Poroshenko is not a nationalist, and actually the extreme nationalists got no more than 2% of the vote, and he got 56%. So all these labels that they've been trying to call the Ukrainian, the regime, you know, it's put to an end. And so that was one piece of good news. The other piece of good news is today. Today is Wednesday, June 3rd, I think, 4th, June 4th. I just heard that there was a meeting between Obama and Poroshenko in Warsaw, and apparently they agreed to supply military aid to Ukraine in the form of ammunition, night goggles, night vision equipment, and vests. And not very big, heavy weapons, but more than the ration packages, MREs, they so-called MMREs, that they supplied before, which was actually laughable that they would go this. So this is the good news. But now let's go back and see what the real situation is, though. Right before the elections, Putin told the West at this economic forum in St. Petersburg that he is going to respect the outcome of the Ukrainian elections. And he did this under a threat from Europe, because the Europeans and the Americans decided to draw two red lines, two triggers that might set off sanctions against Russia. And the triggers were either invasion of eastern Ukraine or interference in the Ukrainian elections. Well, now that the elections are over, Putin has not lived up to either one of these. First of all, there is an outright invasion of eastern Ukraine. The original disturbances were so-called by local pro-Russian patriots, but they didn't get very far because most of the local population did not support them. When Putin realized this, and there is evidence, telephone conversations between the rebels and the Russian army command, where they say, if we don't do something drastic, we're going to get an egg in our face. So Putin said first he has no control over the separatists, but that is another big fat lie. He has almost full control. It's a deceptive game that they're playing all the time. So all of a sudden, 4,500 professional Russian Spetsnaz crossed the Ukrainian border in big numbers, in battalion-sized units, with the latest weapons, and they are the ones that are finding Ukrainian forces trying to control the crossing points. So we have a very bloody confrontation. In fact, this is an invasion, but the West would like to believe, well, but Putin said he's not going to invade, that this is local. This is all just to camouflage things. The second thing is he said that he will respect the Ukrainian elections, but soon after the elections, he said, well, these elections are really illegitimate because they were unconstitutional in Ukraine. So he's not respecting the results, he's questioning the results, and on both counts, he failed to meet his agreement, and in both cases, there is hardly any reaction from the West. What I want to do now is to switch from the current situation and go back in history a little bit to explain, why is Putin so determined to get control of Ukraine? The most obvious question is the notion that he does not want Ukraine to be part of the European Union and NATO, because he views both of these both of these organizations as enemies of Russia and Putin's hopes to reestablish the Russian Empire. And that's for the current situation. But if you go a few steps back, you realize that Putin is determined to control all of Ukraine. Why? Primarily for historic reasons. And that reason is the capital of Ukraine, Kyiv. Kyiv, which is the old capital of the Rus people from 1,000 years ago. And historically, Russia, Belarus, and Ukraine have shared a common history. The common history goes something like this, that the Rurik dynasty established itself in Kyiv. And Kyiv was a prosperous medieval city with close links to Byzantium. It was a very powerful kingdom until the Mongolian invasions. In 1240, the Mongols came and they destroyed everything in its path. They destroyed the capital of Kyiv, the city of Kyiv, to the point that there were just ruins left. It was totally depopulated. There was a desert in this whole area. Whatever remained of the Rus people, and please don't confuse Rus with Russia. Russia at that time never even existed. There was Rus, and these are very fine distinctions, but they mean totally different things. And most people tend to conflate Rus and Russia, which is an error. Whatever vestiges were left of the Rus kingdom, part of it went north and to establish themselves in Moscow. This is the 13th century already. Kyiv Rus was already existing for over 300 years. Moscow didn't even exist at that time. And the other part went west and established the Galician kingdom. And for a long time, the central part of Ukraine was devastated, controlled by Mongols and then Tatars. It's quite a long story, but the reason I talk about Kyiv is because there is in the Russian mythology there is this notion of the third Rome. And for Putin is trying to resurrect that myth, and Rome, as Moscow being the third Rome. The first Rome, of course, was in Italy, Rome, Italy. The second Rome was Byzantium. And the third Rome was supposed to be Moscow. But the path from Byzantium to Moscow leads through Kiev. So he cannot claim this the third Rome myth legitimately, because Kiev is in a way. So it's a subconscious, little talked about reason why he wants to get control of Kiev. And all along this has been his strategy to infiltrate Kiev with fifth column KGB forces, establish the Orthodox Church Moscow Patriarchate presence in Kiev versus the Kiev Patriarchate, which the majority of the population support, both Orthodox churches. And therein lies the one of the main reasons. But the problem is that the people of Kiev are very anti-Russian. The irony is, even today, majority still speaks Russian, but they dislike what the Russians have been trying to do to Ukraine. I want to just retrench a little bit and give you an example from a presentation of a book by Codevilla. It was Angelo Codevilla, a historian who spoke at the Heritage Foundation. Brilliant historian. His subject was war and peace. But during the question and answer period, there was some lady asked, who said she's been to Luhansk and Donetsk, went there and claimed that the Ukrainian fascists were doing terrible things in Donetsk, and that she doesn't understand that because these are the Ukrainians, the Russians are the same people, they speak the same language, and she doesn't understand why these fascists are trying to put down this separatist movement. Mr. Codevilla listened to her very patiently. She got many facts wrong, but he patiently answered her question. He said, the reason for the enmity between Russia and Ukraine can be answered by the fact that Russians have tried to kill Ukrainians by the tens of millions. And when I heard this, I was a little bit taken aback, but when I thought about this, this is actually the fact. The Russians, for the last 350 years, you go through the period of their occupation, all the wars, First World War, communism, the famine, which alone people estimate killed between 6 to 10 million people. Nobody knows the exact number. And then World War II, and then the post-war. This could be, this is a realistic number. It's not an exaggeration. And that, in a nutshell, actually explains why Ukrainians feel this way. Now, the irony is that the harder that Putin tried to occupy, to get a hold of Ukraine, he awakened the natural patriotism and nationalism of the people. The more he tried, the more people are ready to resist. He actually should have learned from history, because he tried the same tactic in 2004 during the Orange Revolution, when he supported Yanukovych in those elections. People rebelled against Putin's interference in Ukrainian elections. He should have learned. Well, he tried it again this time, but he was not successful. Actually, Putin had Plan A, Plan B, and Plan C. His Plan A was Yanukovych. Yanukovych was his man, and Yanukovych said no to the European Union. He would have said no to NATO, and he would have been Moscow's man in Ukraine, and in the process he ruined the country through corruption, through neglect of military, and however, the Ukrainians rose against Yanukovych. They put him down from December through February. They eliminated him, so Plan A did not work for Putin. So he decided on Plan B, and Plan B was capture Crimea. He captured Crimea, but he didn't get everything he wanted, because Eastern Ukraine was still Ukrainian. When he tried to grab hold of the eastern provinces of Donetsk and Luhansk, there was a reaction, finally a delayed reaction from the West, a threat of sanctions. At first they were minimal, they still are minimal, but at least he did not send an army across the way he did in Crimea. And by the way, in Crimea, there are a couple of myths about Crimea. One of them is that it was the local people that rose up in rebellion, and there were no Russian troops. Actually, Putin slipped up later and actually admitted that Russian troops invaded Crimea. The second false statement is that Crimean referendum passed with a 97% agreement. Well, according to surveys, and if you do simple mathematics, and if you exclude half of the population from the referendum and of the eligible ones, it turns out that only 15% of the population of Crimea voted for annexation to Russia. Finally, I will conclude this with another myth about Crimea, that Crimea is Russian. Actually, if you go again through the prism of history and see that for the last 60 years, Crimea was part of Ukraine. And it was part of Ukraine because Khrushchev decided to give Crimea to the Ukrainians. I'll get back to this point a little bit later, but before that, it was Crimea was Russian for a couple hundred years. Before that, it was 300 years Tatars. Before that, you had the medieval Rus. This was Vladimir's territory. Before, you had the Goths, Sarmatians. Very few people realize that Crimea was a Greek colony. Originally, it was a huge Greek colony, and they had a very strong presence. Until World War II, there was a substantial presence of Greeks. Stalin, of course, during World War II, he deported not only all the Tatars, but the Greeks also to Uzbekistan and Central Asia. So what was left were Russians and some Ukrainians. So that's a myth. That's another myth. But I want to get back to this point of 1954 and the reason Khrushchev gave Crimea to the Ukrainians. The main reason for that was that in 1654, 300 years before, Hetman Bohdan Khmelnytsky, who fought against the Poles and the Tatars, made a military alliance with the Tsar of Moscow. And when the Tsar sent troops to Ukraine, the Russians have never left since then. And there are two views of this history. For Ukrainians, this was a military alliance against the Tatars and Poles. For the Russians, this was a union of the two nations. So, to commemorate the 300th anniversary of this brotherly, quote-unquote, union, Khrushchev, in all his benevolence, gave Crimea to Russians because he never expected, he never foresaw that Soviet Union would fall apart like it did in 1991. Thank you.